One of the watercolor problems that every artist faces is turning out a painting that they don't like. So if you've ever said the words, "I hate my painting," this video is for you. Don't be fooled by what I call the Facebook effect. If you're following an artist on social media or looking at their work in their Etsy shop or perhaps in galleries, please remember that what you're looking at is a very carefully curated selection of their best work. And there'll be paintings that they don't like, for sure. For every omelette, there are broken eggs, and painting is no different. It's just that you're not getting to see those paintings, but they are a very natural part of the creative process. Because of that, I think that we should talk about it a bit more. In fact, I've got a 3-step process that I use for dealing with the paintings that I don't love, and I want to share that with you today. It's a process that really covers 2 important aspects of this issue, I think. The first is the sort of touchy-feely mindset issue, and that is the more important one, I promise. The second part of it is the more practical question of what you're actually going to do with this painting that you don't like. But the mindset part is the most important. When we create with our hearts and our minds, the things that we make are an extension of ourselves. And if we harshly criticize those, we're really harshly criticizing ourselves. And that is not going to make your next painting any easier. This is why the mindset part of my process is, I think, the more important. Not everything we create is going to be a masterpiece, but you have to learn to love it anyway. Our paintings are a bit like our children. Most of the time, brilliant and wonderful and a lot of fun. Then there are those other times. So if it's going to be something that happens often, we need to know what to do when it does. I paint a different watercolor series every month, and I have a sort of rule of thumb, a bit like the baker's dozen. For me, it's more like a painter's 11. I know that if I do about 10 paintings, I'm going to have probably an 11th one that I'm not in love with. An example of this is my Rainbow Roosters paintings, and hopefully my nascent video editing skills will allow me to pop up the flip-up video I made, let's say, how about somewhere here? Let's hope. And I produced 10 rooster paintings that I didn't mind, and then there was this other one. So I thought it would be quite useful if I talk you through my process and use that painting as a kind of example. I'm either terribly brave or quite mad. You'll have to let me know in the comments. So my 3-step process starts with analyze, don't criticize. When you are painting something and it's not going particularly well, you know straight away what is wrong with it. Finding the negatives is the easy part. What I think we have to do is to try and make sure we're looking at those things from the perspective of what we are aiming for, rather than berating ourselves for things we think we've got wrong. It's a bit like if you were on a road trip and you're following directions to somewhere you've never been before and you get a bit lost. Spend time dwelling on all the wrong turns you make and you're not going to get very far at all. You'll do much better by focusing on where you actually want to go. Step 2 of the process is to find something good. If I were a psychologist, I would give you a lecture on something called the negativity bias, which means that we pay far more attention to the negatives than we do the positives. It's part of our natural survival instinct programming, but it doesn't help us when we're trying to get better at painting. So I think while it's been easy in step 1 to come up with 1 or 2 pointers of things that we would like to improve upon, it's very important to find at least as many things that you do like about your painting as the things that you found to work on. Step 3 is what to do with that disappointing painting. Well, there are quite a few options available to you, and I'm going to talk you through them while I carry out one of them on my own painting. So we'll speed up that section of the video and I'll tell you what I suggest. This is the painting that didn't make the grade as far as I was concerned for my Rainbow Rooster series. So let's go through the process. Step 1 was to analyze, not criticize. So what happened when I was painting this is when I painted him first, he was very wishy-washy, and I don't like that. I like a big oomph of colour. So it was a good reminder for me that watercolour dries paler. So if you want a nice vibrant colour, you need to be very bold with the pigment in the very first instance. So then when it was dry, I tried to put in a bit more colour. And I managed to do that, but in the process I have lost the sort of energy and movement of his body shape. He now looks like he's pasted on there. I lost the light source and the volume of him, so I wasn't happy with any of that. Now, what that tells me is it's reminding me of what I personally like when I'm painting. Working in layers is a very valid approach to follow. In fact, it's probably the more traditional one. Building up the painting slowly using the transparent properties of the watercolor is something many artists do. But for my personal taste, I like a loose, lively, spontaneous painting that's done all in one go, sort of alla prima style. So that's what I'm going to work towards. Now, you see, once you start criticizing, you can really keep going. But I encourage you not to do that. Find a couple of things and try and view them from the perspective of what you're aiming towards, not trying to pick on your mistakes. So for me, that is be bold with the colour in the first instance, and remember that I like to maintain the spontaneity of that first wash. So let's move on to step 2, which is to find something you do like. And what I did like about this is this soft abstract background. So I'm going to remind myself to incorporate that a bit more often in my paintings. I love this sort of soft focus effect. It kind of gives the idea of perspective, and it emphasizes the subject. If you've got a softly focused background and then a good contrast in the subject, it draws your attention straight to that subject. So that's something I can incorporate next time. The other thing I was really enjoying is this indigo colour. Now it looks like a dark, boring blob of black in my palette, so I tend to ignore it and forget about it, but it's actually delightful, and I'm loving the way it's playing with the other colours in my paint box. And I particularly love the way it's mixing with the Indian red. So there's 2 things that I can take away as positives and remember to include those in my future painting. Okay, so that's our first 2 steps. The third one is, what are we actually going to do with this piece of paper? I'm going to show you my choice and speed up the video while I talk you through what I think are the many options available to you. And please bear in mind, my ideas are certainly not an exhaustive list. I'm sure you'll be able to think of a whole lot of other things that you could do too. Let's get on with it. If you've got a painting in your hands that you're really not liking, then what you've got is a fantastic opportunity. Try and maintain the spirit of play and experimentation, and you can have all sorts of fun with this painting you painted and potentially add to your skill set at the same time. What you're watching me do here is what I consider to be option 3 of my suggested possible courses of action with a painting that you don't like. So I'll get back to that in a minute. But for the first suggestion I have is that you experiment. Now, I explained that this is something that I had already done before you see what I'm doing to the painting at the moment. And that's exactly what I suggest you do. You've got nothing to lose if you're not liking your painting now, so you may as well try out anything you can think of to alter the perceived problems in the painting. It's the time to test out your lifting skills, perhaps. See if you can re-wet that dry paint and lift it out. At the very least, you'll start to learn which paints in your palette do this better than others, and how successful you can be with this after different lengths of drying time. Maybe see if you can add something to the composition. Paint another layer, whatever you can think of. Nothing to lose. Option 2 is to throw it away and never speak of it again. It's just a piece of paper, which I think is another advantage of watercolour, so this is a perfectly valid option. But I'm quite serious when I say never speak of it again. If you have decided that the best thing to do is physically dispose of it, then you don't want to use it as an instrument of mental torture by keeping a tally of your perceived failures in your head. There's a quote on this that I love. The problem is not the problem is that you keep thinking and talking about the problem. That's from Dana Wilde. And that's exactly what I mean. Don't dwell on these things, move on and paint another. How about option 3? This is mixed media, and this is the one you see me doing in the video to the side of the screen there. One of the things that I love about watercolour is how nicely it plays with so many other art supplies. On a base of watercolour you can add coloured pencil, pastel, gouache, pen, ink, many others I'm sure. In fact, you could even take some acrylic paint and paint an entirely new painting over the top of this one. But as you can see, I decided to take a white pen and do some doodling over my rooster. In a minute you'll see that I find some other coloured pens and have a go at doing some extra doodles in those. It's an awful lot of fun. I don't know if I'm making the painting any better, but I can assure you it's so much fun, it's definitely worth a go. Almost worth messing up a painting or two just to have a play with the mixed media afterwards. What about option 4? Flip it. If you're using 300 GSM, which is £140 watercolour paper, and that is what I recommend as the best all-purpose paper, then you can definitely turn that painting over and paint on the back of the page. And if you do that, since it's not a perfectly pristine sheet anymore, it's a bit less intimidating of a blank page to start with, and that is jolly freeing. And actually, I did this by accident once. I spent days searching in my studio for a missing painting, only to find that I had accidentally used it to paint another painting on the reverse side. So it's perfectly possible to use both sides of the paper, whether you do that accidentally or on purpose. Option 5, recycle. How about getting out the scissors and chopping up that painting? Yes, I know, sounds satisfying already. It is. You could turn one less satisfactory painting into a series of tiny little abstract paintings. If you're a crafty sort of soul who's into things like journaling or scrapbooking, then what you have in your hands is a whole lot of ready prepared tags. You can cut them into tag shapes and use them like any other tag in your journal. Add a quote maybe, use it as a journaling tag, or an actual gift tag, or a bookmark. You see, there really are so many options. You could also use any leftover scraps as test paper for trying out colour schemes for the next sort of paintings. So there you are. Regardless of your own opinion of the painting that you have created, please don't waste your energy berating yourself for any perceived mistakes or failures. There's no such thing as a bad painting. There's mostly just more opportunities for art. Happy painting.